James Carter froze, staring at the fake cop in front of him. What began as a routine stop suddenly shifted. Something wasn't right. The man's hand hovered near his pocket, but just then, a squad car appeared. James realized the truth. This wasn't just an imposter. It was someone hiding in plain sight. But what happened next? It would shake him more than he ever expected. Let's start from the beginning. James Carter had just finished his day at the office and was walking home when he noticed the man by the black SUV. The uniformed figure stood there, leaning against the car, looking like he was just another cop on a normal shift. James, a quiet prosecutor with a sharp mind, didn't usually pay much attention to street encounters, but something about this situation made him stop. "Excuse me, sir. Can I ask what's going on here?" James asked, his voice steady, professional. The officer, a middle-aged man with a patchy beard and tired eyes, glanced at James as if he were an inconvenience. His posture was slouched, and there was an unmistakable arrogance in his expression, as if he had seen it all before and found James unimportant. "Just a routine stop. You in a hurry?" The officer's words were dismissive, almost bored. But it was the tone that bothered James. It was too rehearsed, too casual for the situation. Something didn't add up. James narrowed his eyes, glancing at the SUV again. The decals were poorly applied, cheap, uneven, the kind of detail that only someone who didn't care would overlook. His mind began to race, instinct telling him this wasn't a routine stop at all. "Who are you, really?" James asked, his voice shifting, sharper now, laced with suspicion. The officer's eyes darkened. He took a step forward, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, something James didn't miss. "I'm just trying to keep you safe." "What's the problem, huh?" His voice lacked conviction, the words sounding hollow, like a script he had rehearsed too many times. James's pulse quickened as the realization hit him. This man wasn't a real officer. But what was he doing here? And why was he pretending to be one? The tension in the air thickened, the encounter now feeling more like a trap than an ordinary street interaction. James stepped back, his mind racing with questions, all of them more dangerous than the last. Something was off, and the man's presence here was no coincidence. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. James stood still, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious. He had seen enough to know when something was off, and everything about this officer screamed fraud. His mind raced as he weighed his options. He couldn't let this man slip by without revealing the truth. "Where's your badge? Let me see your ID," James demanded, his voice firm, cutting through the silence. The man froze, his eyes darting to the ground for a fraction of a second, then back to James. A bead of sweat appeared on his forehead, an obvious sign of discomfort. His hand twitched near his jacket pocket, as though reaching for something. But then it stopped, hovering in midair, the motion unnatural, like he was reconsidering his next move. The hesitation was all James needed to confirm his suspicion. This wasn't a cop. For a brief, intense moment, James felt a flash of fear, a sinking feeling in his stomach. If this man wasn't who he claimed to be, what was he really after? Why had he chosen James? His thoughts quickly shifted, analyzing the situation with precision. The fake officer's body language was betraying him more with every passing second. The man's forced calm cracked. His voice turned harsh, almost desperate. "Listen, you don't need to know anything. You're just a—" But before he could finish, James stepped forward, his hand already pulling out his phone, his mind racing. "You know, I work with the DA's office, and if you don't want me to call in a real officer, I suggest you leave now." The man's face flushed a deep shade of red, his posture shifting, becoming more aggressive. His stance was a clear sign of someone cornered, and James could see the anger bubbling beneath the surface. He was unraveling, but before the situation could escalate any further, a squad car rounded the corner, the unmistakable wail of sirens cutting through the night. The fake officer's eyes flickered, his tension spiking as he realized his cover was blown. The sound of the approaching car wasn't just a relief. It was a signal that whatever was about to happen next, the game had changed. The sound of the squad car's sirens faded as the real officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of alertness and confusion. The fake officer's face contorted in panic, his calculated calm shattered. James remained unmoved, his focus sharp, and his mind calculating the next steps. "That man is an imposter. He's been posing as a police officer," James said, his voice clear and authoritative. Every word carried the weight of his certainty, as if he had just exposed a criminal in the courtroom. He pointed toward the SUV. "Check the vehicle. It's all fake." The officers didn't hesitate. With practiced precision, they moved toward the black SUV, their movements fluid and controlled. As soon as they opened the door, the truth became undeniable. Inside the vehicle was a stash of stolen police equipment, uniforms, radios, weapons, and forged documents, each item more damning than the last. The fake cop's bluff was up. The facade crumbled before their eyes. Panicked, the man tried to dart away, but before he could make a move, the officers closed in on him, tackling him to the ground with force. He struggled, but it was no use. His desperation was palpable as he attempted to break free, only to find himself restrained in cuffs. James stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. A rush of emotions flooded him, anger at the deception, relief that the charade was over. But there was something else, too, a sense of disbelief. This wasn't just a simple scam. This man had been operating under false pretenses for far too long, taking advantage of people who trusted him. And yet, the real twist, the one that gave James a bitter taste in his mouth, was that the fake cop had never once suspected who he was dealing with. James, a prosecutor with years of experience dissecting lies, had seen through the ruse from the beginning. As the officers led the imposter away, James couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction, mixed with a dark realization. This man had underestimated him, and that mistake would cost him everything. Once everything had settled and the fake cop was taken away in a squad car, James stood by the curb, watching the lights fade into the distance. He felt his pulse slow, the adrenaline wearing off. It wasn't just the act of catching a criminal, it was the fact that this man, who had tried to manipulate him, had no idea that James was a prosecutor. To him, James had only been another target, another person to deceive. But James had known how to fight back. The officers approached him, offering their gratitude, but it was clear from the look in their eyes that they were still processing the incident. "You've got a sharp eye, Mr. Carter," one of them said. "I'm glad you were here tonight." James nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's my job," he replied. As the night fell, James walked away from the scene, the weight of what had happened settling in. There was relief in knowing justice had been done, but also a quiet anger that he had been targeted for something so ridiculous. The truth had been exposed, and it was a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats don't come in obvious forms. He couldn't help but feel satisfied. Justice had won again.